Lake Lanier is disappearing, and 5 million people have no backup plan. Right now, the lake that keeps Atlanta alive has dropped 20 feet, and what's coming up from the bottom is something nobody was supposed to see again. A highway, foundations of houses, the skeleton of a racetrack, half buried in mud, still waiting for a race that ended half a century ago. But here's what they're not telling you. Atlanta was never supposed to depend on this lake in the first place. The dam was built for flood control and power, not drinking water. And yet somehow, an entire city of 5 million people staked their survival on it anyway. And now the droughts are getting longer. The population keeps growing. And the legal battle that 3 states, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, fought over this water for 35 years, has finally gone silent. Which means there's only one question left. When the water runs out, and scientists say it will, what does Atlanta do next? Lake Lanier was not built for Atlanta. That is the part of this story that almost nobody knows. When the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers closed the sluice gates of Buford Dam on February 1st, 1956, the official plan was simple: flood control, hydropower, navigation. That was it. Drinking water was never part of the authorization Congress approved. Recreation was an afterthought. And yet today, 5 million people wake up every morning and turn on their faucets, completely trusting that this one lake will deliver. That trust was never part of the original deal. Building the lake required a sacrifice that the history books rarely mention. Before the water rose, this was forest, farmland, communities, real places where real people lived. Construction crews floated on the rising water and cut the treetops down, not all the way, just halfway. They left the stumps standing. And those stumps are still there today, lurking beneath the surface, invisible to every swimmer, every boater, every family spending a summer weekend on the water. When the lake drops, they emerge, tall, pale, and ghostly. A forest that has been underwater for 70 years, waiting. But the stumps are not the only things down there. Beneath the surface of Lake Lanier sit old homes, barns, and roads that were simply swallowed when the water rose. There is a stretch of Georgia Highway 53 down there. There are foundations of houses that families built and lost. And there is a racetrack, Gainesville's Looper Speedway, buried under decades of water and sediment. During the catastrophic drought of 2007, when the lake dropped more than 20 feet, the grandstand tops of that speedway broke the surface. One journalist described it as a haunted memory, waiting for spectators who would never come. Here is what makes all of this more than just a strange historical footnote. The city of Atlanta did not contribute a single dollar to the construction of Buford Dam. Not 1 cent. Alabama Mayor William Hartsfield spent years lobbying Congress to fund the project, traveling to Washington repeatedly to argue that Atlanta needed this water for its future. Congress approved the money. The dam was built. But the authorization never included drinking water as a purpose. Atlanta simply grew into a dependency that nobody officially sanctioned. And by the time anyone noticed, millions of lives were already attached to that lake. A reservoir built for one reason quietly became the lifeline for an entire American city. And the foundation of that lifeline was shakier than anyone wanted to admit. The water was always borrowed. The question was, how long before someone asked for it back? In 1950, Atlanta was a mid-sized southern city of roughly 500,000 people. Lake Lanier was still being built. The Chattahoochee River still ran free. And nobody was particularly worried about water. There was enough. There had always been enough. That comfortable assumption would not survive the century. Today, Metro Atlanta is home to more than 5.7 million people. It is one of the fastest growing major cities in the entire United States. And nearly every single one of those people depends on the same lake that was designed for a city that no longer exists. Lake Lanier now supplies approximately 70% of Metro Atlanta's drinking water. The remaining 30% comes from Allatoona Lake and roughly 20 smaller reservoirs scattered across the region. There is no river running through downtown Atlanta to fall back on. There is no massive underground aquifer waiting beneath the city. Atlanta is built on granite, and granite does not give up water easily. Groundwater supplies less than 1% of the region's public water needs. What falls from the sky is almost all Atlanta has. And what falls from the sky has become increasingly unreliable. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. In the 1950s, Atlanta drew roughly 80 million gallons of water per day from the Chattahoochee River Basin. By 2015, that figure had climbed to 510 million gallons per day. The lake did not get bigger. The rain did not get more predictable. The demand simply kept rising, year after year, subdivision after subdivision, with no serious plan for what would happen when the two lines on the graph finally crossed. And they are going to cross. By 2050, Metro Atlanta is projected to add another 2.9 million people. The Environmental Protection Agency estimates that total water demand across Georgia could increase by 10 to 50% over the next half-century. At the same time, climate scientists project that available water will decrease as droughts intensify and temperatures rise. More people needing more water from a source that is delivering less. That is not a prediction. That is arithmetic. The emergency safety net is thinner than most people realize. In a serious shortage, Atlanta's backup reserves could serve the city for 3 to 5 days. The Bellwood Quarry Project, a repurposed rock quarry converted into a 2.4 billion-gallon emergency reservoir, extended that window significantly. But even Bellwood buys weeks, not months. It is a life jacket, not a lifeboat. Atlanta built a metropolis around a reservoir that was never designed to carry it. And every new resident, every new highway, every new neighborhood being carved out of the Georgia hills adds one more straw to the same bending back. The summer of 2007 began like any other in Georgia. Hot, humid, and dry in the way that southern summers always are. Nobody panicked in June. Nobody panicked in July. But by the time autumn arrived, and the rain still had not, the monitors at Buford Dam were showing numbers that made water managers go quiet in a way that frightened everyone around them. Lake Lanier was falling. Fast. By late 2007, the lake had dropped to 1,050.79 feet above sea level. Full pool sits at 1,071 feet. That is a difference of more than 20 feet. 20 feet of missing water, representing billions of gallons that Atlanta needed and the sky refused to provide. The lake bottom that had been hidden since the 1950s was coming back into the light. The highway, the foundations, the racetrack, all of it surfacing like evidence of something the city had tried to forget. State officials ran the numbers and arrived at a conclusion they could barely bring themselves to say out loud. At the rate Atlanta was consuming water, Lake Lanier was somewhere between 90 and 121 days from complete depletion. If the lake ran dry, Atlanta would be left with approximately 3 days of emergency supply. 3 days for a city of millions, with no backup, no pipeline from another state, no miracle reservoir waiting in reserve. Georgia Governor Sonny Perdue did what felt, in that moment, like the only option left. He stood on the steps of the state capitol and prayed for rain. It was not a political stunt. It was a genuine act of desperation from a man who had run out of engineering solutions and was staring down a catastrophe that modern America was not supposed to experience. A major city in the world's wealthiest nation genuinely at risk of running out of water before Christmas. The response was immediate and severe. The Army Corps of Engineers cut the flow from Buford Dam from 750 cubic feet per second to 650. Outdoor watering was banned across the entire northern half of Georgia for more than a year. Restaurants were ordered to serve water only when customers specifically asked for it. Georgians were told to take shorter showers. The drought had turned ordinary daily life into a rationing exercise. Atlanta received only 1.85 inches of rainfall in 2007, compared to the annual average of 48 inches. By spring 2008, even after winter rains brought partial relief, the lake still sat 14 feet below normal. Scientists warned the system had not truly recovered for years afterward. The crisis passed, but it left something behind, a quiet, uncomfortable knowledge that it could happen again, and that next time, the city might not be so lucky. While Atlanta was watching its lake disappear, 3 states were already at war over who owned the water inside it. That war did not start in 2007. It started in 1990, and it would not fully end for another 36 years. The Apalachicola-Chattahoochee-Flint River Basin connects Georgia, Alabama, and Florida through a single chain of water. Lake Lanier sits at the very top of that chain. Whatever Atlanta pulls out of the lake never reaches the communities downstream, and those communities noticed. Alabama sued the Army Corps of Engineers in 1990, arguing that redirecting Lake Lanier's water to Metro Atlanta violated the original congressional authorization. Georgia was taking water that downstream industries, agriculture, and cities in Alabama depended on. Florida joined the fight with an even sharper accusation. Atlanta's overconsumption, Florida argued, was starving the Apalachicola River of the fresh water it needed to survive. By 2012, Apalachicola Bay's oyster fishery had collapsed completely. An entire industry, generations of fishing families, wiped out. Florida blamed Georgia's thirst. The legal battles climbed all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Twice. In 2009, a federal judge ruled against Georgia, declaring that water supply had never been an authorized purpose of Lake Lanier. Georgia was given 3 years to negotiate or face losing access to its own lifeline. 2 years later, an appeals court reversed that decision entirely. Then, Florida sued again. Then Georgia countersued. The courtrooms became as crowded as the lake itself. In 2021, Georgia finally secured a $70 million perpetual contract with the Corps, locking in the right to draw up to 222 million gallons per day from Lake Lanier through 2050. The Supreme Court sided with Georgia over Florida, and in February 2026, Alabama dropped its final appeal. For the first time since 1989, not a single lawsuit connected these 3 states in a courtroom. Georgia won. Legally, the water belongs to Atlanta, but winning in court does not make it rain. And a legal guarantee means nothing when the lake itself decides not to cooperate. There is a version of Lake Lanier that millions of people know. Sunlight on the water, boats cutting across the surface on a Saturday morning, children jumping off docks. It looks like one of the safest, most peaceful places in Georgia. That version of the lake is real, and it is also incomplete. Beneath that calm surface sits a different world entirely. The stumps of a drowned forest, tall and invisible until the water drops. The concrete foundations of homes that families built and lost. Old bridge supports wrapped in rebar, anchored in place like underwater walls. When the lake level falls and those obstacles rise closer to the surface, the water that looks so inviting becomes something far more dangerous. Swimmers and boaters move through it without knowing what is inches below their hull or just beneath their feet. The numbers are not abstract. 11 people drowned or died in boating accidents on Lake Lanier in a single recent year. Among them, a father and a son. Every one of those calls goes to the dive teams attached to local fire departments. They enter water that is frigid, nearly pitch black, and filled with hazards that their training can describe but cannot fully prepare them for. One diver in the water, one on shore, connected by a rope, communicating through tugs. They say they never know what they are going to find. One diver put it simply, "It is bad enough to lose a life. But when you surface and see the family waiting on the shore, and you have to walk toward them with the answer they already know is coming, that is the moment that never leaves you." That is why they go back in. Lake Lanier asks a great deal of the people who love it and the people who protect it. It gives back recreation, water, and beauty, but it keeps secrets. And when the water level drops and the lake's hidden architecture moves closer to the surface, those secrets become the kind that cost lives. The lake looks calm. It always looks calm. The drought of 2007 was supposed to be a warning, a once-in-a-generation crisis that would force Georgia to rethink everything about how it managed water. And for a while, it looked like the lesson had been learned. Conservation programs launched, efficiency targets were set, per capita water use dropped. People told themselves the system had been fixed. Then the fall of 2024 arrived. Metro Atlanta entered what scientists were calling a flash drought. Not the slow, creeping kind that builds over months and gives communities time to prepare. A flash drought descends in weeks, turning normal conditions into a crisis before most people even realize something is wrong. Atlanta received just 4% of its average fall rainfall. 4%. The U.S. Drought Monitor classified large portions of northern Georgia under severe to extreme drought conditions almost overnight. Climate scientists had a name for what was making it worse. La Niña, a weather pattern that typically brings warmer, drier winters to the southeast, arriving precisely during the season when Lake Lanier most desperately needs rain to recover. The Climate Prediction Center declared La Niña conditions active in late 2024, with forecasts projecting they would persist through early 2026. For a lake that depends on winter rainfall to refill, that was about the worst possible timing imaginable. And the long-term picture is darker still. By 2050, Atlanta is projected to experience up to 97 days per year with temperatures exceeding 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Today, that number sits at 51. More heat means more evaporation from the lake surface. More evaporation means less water available. More demand from a growing city, pulling against a shrinking supply. The 2023 National Climate Assessment confirmed what many scientists had feared. Droughts in the southeast are not arriving more often, but when they do arrive, they are hitting harder than anything in the historical record. The 2007 crisis revealed what was possible. The 2024 flash drought suggested it was becoming normal. And the climate projections make one thing unmistakably clear. The worst drought Atlanta has ever seen may still be ahead of it. Atlanta has not been sitting still. That much is worth saying clearly. The city has made real, measurable progress on water conservation over the past 2 decades. In 2000, the average Georgian used roughly 150 gallons of water per day. By 2016, that number had dropped to around 110 gallons. Leaking fire hydrants were repaired. Residential retrofits were funded. Water mains that had been hemorrhaging supply for years were finally fixed. The system got more efficient. That matters. The Bellwood Quarry project was the boldest move. City officials purchased an old rock quarry a few miles west of downtown and converted it into one of the largest emergency water reservoirs in the United States, holding 2.4 billion gallons. Before Bellwood, Atlanta's emergency supply could serve the city for 3 to 5 days. After Bellwood, that window stretched to several weeks. It was a genuine leap forward. It was also, in the context of what the city actually faces, a more comfortable way to be unprepared. Experts have been circling a harder set of solutions for years. Water recycling, treating wastewater to a level where it can be reused for irrigation and industrial purposes, rather than simply discharged, could significantly reduce pressure on Lake Lanier. Clayton County has already demonstrated this works, treating up to 42 million gallons of wastewater per day through constructed wetlands. Scaling that model to serve a region consuming 510 million gallons daily is a different challenge entirely. Desalination from the Atlantic Ocean has been floated as an option. The physics work. The cost is staggering. Nobody has pulled the trigger. The hard truth that water managers return to again and again is this: Atlanta has essentially reached the ceiling of what Lake Lanier can reliably provide. Every new resident pushes the system closer to its limits. Every new suburb, every new industrial park, every new tower going up on the Atlanta skyline represents more demand piling onto a reservoir that has no room left to grow. The solutions exist. They are expensive, politically complicated, and long overdue. The question is whether Atlanta will choose them before the lake forces the choice instead. Stand at the edge of Lake Lanier on a quiet morning, and it is almost impossible to believe any of this. The water stretches out flat and silver in the early light. Herons move along the shoreline. Somewhere out on the lake, a boat engine turns over and fades into the distance. It looks like permanence. It looks like something that has always been here and always will be. But permanence is the lie that Lake Lanier tells better than almost anything else. Beneath that surface sits a drowned highway, foundations of homes, the bones of a forest that has not seen sunlight in 70 years. And somewhere down there, the grandstands of a racetrack that resurfaced during the worst drought in modern Georgia history, pale and strange and wrong. Like a memory the lake was supposed to keep buried. The lake recovers. It always has. Winter rains come, the levels rise, and the ghosts sink back below the surface where nobody has to look at them. But the margin between recovery and catastrophe has been shrinking for decades, and nothing on the horizon suggests that trend is about to reverse. 5 million people are depending on a reservoir that was never designed to hold them. The legal battles that consumed 3 states for 35 years are finally over, and Georgia won. But the rain does not care about court rulings. The drought does not negotiate. And the climate that is making every dry season longer and every wet season less predictable is not waiting for Atlanta to finish building its next emergency reservoir before it delivers the next crisis. The 2007 drought ended. The lake refilled. The city exhaled and moved on. That is the pattern Atlanta has always relied on. Crisis, recovery, relief, and then just enough comfort to forget how close it came. The water wars are over. The water crisis is not. And 5 million people are still watching the same lake and waiting, and hope that this time, like every time before, the rain comes back before the lake runs out.